But again, to all of our new folks, thank you for joining us for today's Colorado Legislative Update by Tyler Mounsey, the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Colorado Bar Association. Special thanks to our event sponsor, Pete Goldstone. We're going to get started in about a minute. We had 66 folks or so who signed up, and we have about half of that right now. So I want to make sure everyone gets in and connected before we hand things off. And the one question I've been asked, do we get CLE credit for this? Yes, you do. The CLE form is in my inbox. I will send that out after the fact to everyone who registered. I'll also send a link to the recording, which we'll be posting on our YouTube. So if there's any parts you missed or want to revisit, or if you have to leave for lunch, anything like that, you'll be able to revisit it after the fact. I know there is a PowerPoint. I will get that from Tyler and send that out as well once I receive it. Let's see, still going good on connections. Tyler, I think what I'll do, we'll get started and I'll just keep monitoring things because I don't want to waste the hour. So let's officially get started, everyone. I know we still have some folks we're waiting on, so I'll keep an eye on that. My name is Kyle Mares. I'm with the Boulder County Bar Association. I would like to give a huge thanks to Tyler Mounsey, the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Colorado Bar Association. He has graciously agreed to join us today to give a Colorado legislative update. I know from reading the newspaper, this was a wild legislative session, so I think this is going to be a pretty full hour. I want to give a special thanks to today's event sponsor, Pete Goldstone. They're a great law firm with a lot of members who are BCBA members, which we like to see. They were gracious enough to sponsor this and help put this on. Again, I will send out the CLE form after the program ends today. I'll also have a link to the recording. If you have any questions for me, you can use the chat or send me an email. If you have any questions for Tyler, he has said you can either use the chat if you don't feel like you want to come in, or you are able to unmute yourselves. So if there's a pause or you feel like you'd like Tyler to go over something, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Tyler said all questions are valid and he's open for them. But otherwise, I'm going to hand things off to him. And thank you all again for joining us. Tyler, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let's make sure. Okay. Let me get all my stuff settled. You know, it's still, you would think after all this time, we'd know how to do a lot of this stuff better, but it takes a second, right? All right, folks. All right. Is everyone, Kyle, can you see that screen? Am I good?
You are good. I can see and hear you. And I see the first draft, which you can mention. That's pretty funny why that says first draft on there.
Yeah, let me, there we go. Yeah, so thank you for having me, Tyler Mounsey, Legislative Director, Colorado Bar Association. This is a 2023 legislative session wrap-up first draft. Why did I call it first draft? The session really just ended, and we'll talk more about it, but it does take time for things to end. Today, what I want to do, I've been at Colorado Bar Association for, this is my second session there. I think this is my 12th or 13th legislative session overall. And I know sometimes that if you ever have a conversation reading the media, it seems such like a linear process. And so I thought what might be good today is that, yes, I'll go over bills. Don't get me wrong. But a couple things. I won't be covering all the bills. There's no way to do that. Even all the bills that we did at Colorado Bar Association. I encourage questions at any time. Please feel free to come off. I am going to have time for questions and answers at the end as well. And I'm also going to make myself readily available for follow-up. So if anyone has ever interacted with me before, please know that you can always call me, text me, email me, let me know. As we're figuring out things here in Denver, making sure that that session is finalized, and we'll talk a little bit more what that process is like. There's always going to be things that change. So please, by all means. Now, I think it's always important to start with introduction. And I did this last year. I don't know if I spoke to Boulder Bar last year, but I will do it again. And trust me, some of this might be a little repetitive, but I'll do it quickly. Why? A lot of our lobbying and legislative strategy at the Colorado Bar Association, but not the topics that we cover, and I'll cover that, is set by myself. I am a registered lobbyist. We also have a contract lobbyist. And I think it's important for people to understand where I'm coming from, right? And the only way you can know that is you know who I am and where I'm from. Originally from New York. I've done my long amount of time in DC, and I've been in Colorado for 17 years, I think, at this juncture. I have been working in government and politics since the late 90s. I have worked for the White House, presidential candidates, all levels of government. I worked for 2 governors, Hickenlooper and Ritter, worked for state agencies, and I've been a lobbyist only on the state level for like the last 10, 12 years. My approach is always going to be regulatory. I used to work at the Department of Regulatory Agencies and Colorado Department of Higher Education, but I am a big believer that the details that come into a situation legislatively is always best when we all understand the same thing that we're talking about. And that's my regulatory approach, because some things you can't argue. Turns out a lot of things you can argue, right? And so when I speak about things legislatively, I really want to make sure everyone understands that I prefer to over communicate, and I prefer to figure out ways to move forward, even if you don't agree with me. I have a process in my head where I think if 10 people are sitting around a table, I believe 9 of those people are going to agree, but there's going to be that one piece that we don't really agree on. So let's focus our time there. Also, I never look at any individual legislative session as its own. They build, they stack, the state changes, the people change. And we always have to figure out what we're looking at and how we're looking at it, right? On a similar note, I don't want to assume anything. So I want to make sure I talk about the Colorado State Legislature and make sure we're all on the same page, make sure we all know the same things, have the same data in front of us so we can talk about it effectively and efficiently if there's any questions or if you're thinking about when I'm explaining something. Because I will be honest, a lot of this is about how the sausage is made, right? I love this slide because it really does show and highlight that nitty gritty dirty part of what is happening legislatively. And that's not the political side. There is just parts of the policy that are not always known to the public. And I always want to make sure that we're talking about that as opposed to just 1 + 1 = 2. And plus, you know, I like putting a slide of sausage in my slide deck. I just think it's funny. But so forgive me on this point, but the Colorado General Assembly, I assume everybody knows about it, but a couple things I want to make sure you do know. They meet every January through May. We have a part-time state legislature. They have other jobs. They do other things. They have other influences. We have 65 in the House, 35 in the Senate. Overwhelming majority that has grown recently in election, 46-19 in the House, 23-12 in the Senate, as you could tell. And a lot of people often ask me, how do bills come up? How do we get to bills? And I go, well, that's easy. And they don't like to answer, but I'll go. Every member gets 5 bills. Legislatively speaking, they can say, they pull a title. And so if they want to say, hey, let's celebrate Tyler Mounsey Day, they'll pull the title, they'll go to their nonpartisan legislative legal services who do all of their work for them and all of their drafting, and say, hey, I'm going to pull this title, we'll write the bill in a little bit, and they write that bill another time. Every legislator gets the ability to do that with 5 bills. Is that the end of it? No, they often get more bills. Some bills come up, as we've all learned and read in the media. You can also get bills from interim committees. You can get bills from task force. You can get bills from a lot of places, but this is basically how we build that docket of bills that everyone goes through in this state legislature every year, right? We're also required to pass a balanced budget. The things that I use to make sure that the Colorado Bar Association is in these conversations are pretty straightforward, right? I prefer to really make sure that members are standing on my shoulders because there's a process to it. And we'll talk about that too in a second. But we use legislative meetings. So meetings with legislators that include stakeholders. Sometimes it's just stakeholders. Other advocacy groups, depends upon what bill we're working on. Happy to meet and talk with anyone, whether we agree or disagree. There's also committee hearings. Being there, provide resources, testimony. There's a lot of situations that happen within that state capitol. And these are things that the members do, but while a lot of that's going on, there's also that lobbying perspective. So for example, if we're talking about testimony, yeah, as a member, you go, you provide testimony on the bill, you answer questions from the legislators. That's not the end of it. On the side, we're counting the votes of the committee if we need to, making sure they understand tidbits of the testimony. Maybe we're coordinating social media. Maybe we're coordinating with other stakeholders. Maybe we're sharing those documents, any other supporting documents that may have come up in the process with them, and making sure that the legislators know that that expert that I have brought forward is that number one person. And it really helps that legislative process as we go through it. Now, let's talk by the numbers. Now, why did I say first draft at the beginning? Again, I can't stress enough. The session is still really, really, really raw. When I say the bills are done, all the bills are done, but not all of them have been processed. So if you go on the Colorado General Assembly website, some of them still show they're in committee. They're still trying to figure out what happened with everything. And we have software, but all pulls from their database. So I have a good idea. Some of it's coming in. And what we're really working with is this 30-day clock that the governor's working with right now. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But what I do know is a couple things. We are somewhere between 678, 681 introduced bills this session. It's a little bit less than last year. Why is that number a little different? I'm not sure that both numbers are considering all types of bills. So there's Senate and House bills, but then there are variations of that. Concurrent resolutions, things of that nature, and a duplicate depend upon chamber. And so some of those bills really don't always get counted the right way at the end of the session. I am sure there is a staff attorney somewhere whose life is not great and they're doing a lot of database work right now. What I can tell you is that I do know a week out from the end of the session, which ended on the previous Monday, not this recent Monday, but the Monday before that, on May, and that a week before the end of session, so we're talking almost 2-3 weeks ago, this is what we were looking at the end of session. 612 bills were introduced. So with a week left, some 60 odd bills got added, 70 bills, somewhere around there. 355 were done, 257 still required action. And again, this didn't include things called late bills. Late bills add to that tally of a legislator. After the deadlines for introducing bill and being able to bring it forward and put it in committee, you can request from leadership a late bill, and then it gets introduced and hopefully it has enough time through the legislative process to get through. So what is this telling you? Why am I sharing this with you? With May 1st, there was a lot of work to do. And everyone in the Capitol was like, we still haven't figured a lot of these bigger conversations. And so they're really hoping and figuring out how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? And that's where this workload management from leadership really comes into play and starts to play a political role as well. And again, we're going to talk about some of that in a little bit. I can tell you the governor has vetoed 3 bills, a clemency bill, the gray wolf reintroduction bill, and the 3rd bill. I have it in my notes here. I'll tell you about in a second. More importantly, I think it's good that I talk about how the Colorado Bar Association handles our legislative process. And I get this a lot from folks who are members, other lobbyists. One person has told me, it's like, isn't the bar a neutral arbiter of justice or something? I don't know what they said. And I go, maybe we try to be the best representative of the legal practice in the practice areas, make sure that we're supporting the judicial system, make sure we're doing what's best for the work that we do. That doesn't mean we're going to be neutral. It does mean that we have somewhere around 18,000 attorneys as members and probably 18,000 opinions. So how do we manage that process? We try to do the best we can. And I always have to clarify, I don't set the agenda. It's not my personal privilege on what we cover and what we don't cover. That's not how this goes. I do set the lobby strategy, but I'm not the person who brings up the topics. And you could tell from this slide how this goes. So bills are introduced. And in our office, I have a wonderful colleague, Jess Ham, who helps me bring those bills to sections. We also have a software called Bill Track 50 that assigns it. Every section's a little different size, obviously, but they review this. People volunteer to be legislative liaisons in the sections, right? They're attorneys, just like yourselves. And they review or set up that system that they use in order to come up with a memo and a bill analysis and figure out if they're going to be supportive, amending, or opposed. After that, the section votes on it. And after the section votes on it, it has to be sent to the Legislative Policy Committee for the Colorado Bar Association, or LPC. The LPC is, by bylaws, the deciding factor for what bills get added to the legislative agenda for the Colorado Bar Association. It's, again, populated by members from all different sections, and they're able to talk about the analysis provided by the sections and figure out if it's, and take a vote whether it's something they wish to support or don't support. And then after all of that, once they take that vote, it goes to the lobby team. I'm not only Director of Legislative Relations, like I said, I am a registered lobbyist. We also have a contract lobbyist, Amber Valdez. I'm probably a little biased, but I think we are a wonderful, amazing lobby team. And once we're able to do that, the only people who can decide what's on the agenda is the Legislative Policy Committee. And the only people who can speak on behalf of the Colorado Bar Association to anyone within the Capitol, just not legislators, is myself. We do that to make sure that we have accountability and transparency. It also helps line up conversations as much as possible, because if there's multiple conversations, it gets very lost very quickly and things go south and bills get lost or policy doesn't get done. And I always try to avoid that. It's my goal, is to make sure that we are doing the best that we can to make sure we're representing the pieces that our sections want us to do. So if anyone ever says, hey, why doesn't the bar do this? Why doesn't the bar do that? Happy to explain to them the process. I get it. It's probably not the quickest thing in the world, but it is a transparent one. And I also ask other attorneys, well, how do I get involved? Go find your section or practice area. I'm more than happy to have you, chime in. I tell you right now, they could all use the help, right? There's a lot of bills. I would argue that between all of our sections, we have probably reviewed every single bill that was introduced. Did we take action on all of them? No, by no means. But I do think it's important to know that someone at Colorado Bar Association did lay eyes on every bill. Now, the next piece I'd like to talk about a little bit is a wonderful graph that my predecessor put in here. And it's all often about timing. I think I get a lot of questions sometimes about, well, I'm a family law attorney and this is what this says and this is what we should do. Why is this legislator doing this? Why is surprisingly not part of the conversation? They do tell you why they're bringing legislation, but if it disagrees with your point, they're under no onerous to explain to you why they have to do it. What they want to do is bring their agenda, introduce it to the legislative process, and move it through, they being the Colorado General Assembly. And the more time that we take to deliberate on a position, the less time we have to influence that outcome. And this bill really signifies that. And so it's really important that not only are we acting with deliberate knowledge and justification, but doing so in a time frame so we know that we can be heard and be involved in the process. The legislative process is 120 days, waits for no one, and it's like a rock rolling down the mountain. It's going to go either way. We know that's going to happen, so we have to be the best version of ourselves to figure out how to step into that. And I always tell people, if you have something, say it now. There's not a pause. I mean, yes, I've taken a couple of days off, but what I'm doing now is starting working on next year. We have to get going as soon as humanly possible. It's just the only way that we can do it. What I'm going to do next is sort of break down some of the political aspects of the session. And after that, I'll go into bills, and there's tons of bills. If you have bills that you want me to talk about, make sure you tell me. I don't know if I have access to chat in the way that I'm set up at the moment. Oh yeah, it's over there. Feel free, but also feel free to come off mute and ask your question. But what I wanted to really talk about is tying everything that I've talked about together so far. We are at a point where I'm telling you that I'm from New York and from DC, and a lot of you feel like, why is he doing this? I'm trying to explain to you Colorado legislature, which a lot of people are like, why is he doing this? This is something we covered in grade school. And the thing is that it's important because it helps you understand my legislative approach, which is about relationship management. Relationship management is the number one thing that I do. When you have a hard session, it doesn't mean that that's the end all and be all. It means that you have opportunities, depending upon how you intersect with people, to move forward. And a lot of people ask, and I'm always happy to share, yeah, I am a registered Democrat, but I work with everybody, and I have worked with everybody, and I have a long history of working with everybody. Why? Personally, I believe that if you go to the state capitol, you're not trying to be the supervillain. That doesn't mean I agree with everybody, but I do believe everyone honestly feels they're doing what's best and what's right. And just the way that I was raised is, if that's the case, try your hardest to work with everyone to figure out a way to move forward. And if you're going to do that, you're going to have to understand something. And I borrowed from my friend Bill Hader here. He's not actually my friend. Every relationship is work, right? And any of us who are parts of families, probably all of us, are married, good portion of us, know that this to be true. If you don't, feel free to talk to me later and we can have a conversation about it. But what I'm saying is that at the state capitol, we're in that same position where we have to make sure that we're doing the best to be clear, concise, honest with everyone as soon as we walk into that building, not just legislators. I want to make sure drafters understand where I'm coming from. I want to make sure people who I don't agree with understand where I'm coming from. And often that's connecting them with members and saying, hey, listen, this is why we're looking at this. This is how we're approached. We don't agree. Fine. Okay. Does that mean there's no room for us? And often there is always room. And I think that's one of the things that we had an issue with. Sorry, pause, I had a question. Where in the process flow diagram does the quadratic ranking occur? You know, I wish I can answer that question for you. I don't know. Sorry, Robin. But I will say, the part that we want to figure out is how do we move that policy forward? And let's talk about the session, because that's how we approach this. Does that always work? Let's find out. Screens are not working. I call this session a tale of multiple tales. It's very unoriginal, but that's what it felt like. It felt like there was a lot of driving. There's a few continuous driving forces really directing that session. And you're sitting in that Capitol and you're going, what is going on? This is insanity. And to be honest, I often felt that this is what my session felt like. I'm sitting there at the Capitol going, oh, this is fine. It's all fine. And it's not, because we are put in a position where there's multiple groups vying, depending upon how the political landscape is, to get their particular agendas. But not only that, there's a wake to it. What bills are not getting discussed? What bills haven't been introduced? What conversations haven't happened? Who hasn't been discussed? Has the public been involved? Right? This process is for the public as much as it is for legislators and lobbyists, right? And sometimes I think we lose sight of that. And so what I want to do is talk about this in like three sort of biggish ways, right? We're going to do before the 120 days, we're going to do during the 120 days, and then we'll do after the 120 days. So let's talk about the 2022 election. I hope everyone remembers it. Things really did change a lot, right? Everyone had a race. U.S. Senate, House, governor. There was a bunch of recalls, a bunch of municipal races. Again, there was also some recently, including state House and state Senate. Additionally, the legislative process, which does start in January, really can get kicked back to starting in August or September. Conversations, stakeholdering. When there's election in November, most of that didn't happen until late November, early December. And it really pushed back that whole timing. Committees didn't meet. People didn't know where they were. People thought that there was going to be a much smaller Democratic majority, but it turns out they were very wrong, and there was a much larger Democratic majority. Things shifted. In the end, we had 40 new state legislators out of 100. 40% of all our state legislators were new. That is a crazy number. It's great, but it is a large amount of learning, figuring out what you're doing, how you're going to do that, and then also navigating your political landmines as an elected official in 120 days, which in the end is not really a lot. Most of those new legislators were Democrat, obviously, but they were from both parties, and a lot of them were very progressive. And so what's really just sort of setting forward here is that also, I would say a lot of our newly elected officials across both parties were, I don't want to say singularly focused, but I'll use it because they ran on an issue and then that's what they want to accomplish. Is that very different from other elected officials? No, but a lot of them do diversify the things that they feel they can get done when they get to the state capitol. That didn't happen, in my opinion. And again, this is my opinion. Well, what came out of all of this is that we had a very centrist Democratic leadership in the state House and the state Senate. We had a growing young as far as time at the Capitol, electeds who were very progressive, who sometimes did not meet with the rest of the party. And we had a GOP that had just suffered a significant loss that they didn't think they were going to get. Some would describe it as spiraling, some otherwise, but also they have not changed necessarily their approach politically. That's their call. So the Governor Polis, good old Boulder, goes, I have more of a mandate. The state House, state Senate goes, we have more of a mandate. People have decided to send more Democrats to the House. So who's right? Who gets to do what they want to do? What happens when these three forces meet? This is all the type of things that we're taking a look at, and it makes a very divisive legislative session. I mean, yeah, I guess they're friends, but it really does pit people against each other. And we have to figure out what that landscape is and who's able to navigate it and what groups or organizations who are not on that side of the glass, and meaning that they literally put the legislators on the other side of the glass at the Capitol, that can help them understand, that can help them figure it out, that can help them know that the path they're taking might not be the right one, or it is the right one. What's their influences? Sometimes, to put too much of a blunt point on it, is that just saying that you have a fact-based evidence scenario is not enough. Sometimes you have to weigh all of these factors to make sure that you're successful. Let's talk about during the 120 days. New legislators again, right? As they're learning their pathway forward, they're saying, hey, listen, I don't think we're getting the things done that we need to, right? They're going, well, why is my own party stopping me from doing something I feel right? Why do I have to work with the GOP? Republicans are going, we're silenced, we're disenfranchised. Leadership's trying to pull everybody together. Governor Polis has his own agenda. There's a lot of factors going on here. Again, I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong, but it's interesting to know a couple things. And so here are some things that I thought was fascinating about the session, like real interesting moments. One is the first day of session. The majority party picks their leadership. That's how it goes. They caucus. They figure it out internally. There's always some fights because, everyone wants to be speaker or president of the Senate, but they figure it out. And then they bring it to the large body. And as a sign of working together, everybody votes for that person. There's a thing that they say, majority gets its way, minority gets its say. That's what some of these state legislators said. And I think that What happened this time was fascinating. Republican Party decided to nominate their own person, Representative Bottoms, who was sworn in just 10 minutes before the speaker conversation in the House. And it was not a unanimous vote. It was 55-8. I think that's the second time that I've ever seen that. And I think that might be the second time in a very long amount of time. It's a interesting split from what has traditionally happened. Now, I am a first-generation American, and I'm the first person to say, hey, you don't always have to do things that just because tradition dictates it. But at the Capitol, these are things that they rely on to make sure they can get their work done. And so it's a fascinating thing that they're not able to keep that aligned. On that same note, it began to show this power imbalance with Republicans, right? It began to see this very split scenario. And they very early on in this session, which is often something they wait to the end, started using something that we would call stall tactics. Reading bills at length, filibustering. Reading bills at length is a time crusher, right? If you ask for the bill, and anyone could do it, for the bill to be read at length, they plug it into a computer voice just sits there and reads it until it's all done. And it can take days. It can take days. And then leadership goes, okay, what are we going to do here? Well, now we have to limit debate or we're not going to get there. Is that the right call? I don't know. But you can understand why people begin to feel disenfranchised. It makes sense. And then again, that other portion of the Democratic Party sitting there going, why are we being told that we have to work with Republicans? They're obviously not aligned with their ideals. They're obviously trying to hurt us. They're obviously trying to hurt our way of life. And I also feel I'm not getting enough support as a person of color. I'm not feeling I'm getting enough support for the things that I believe should happen in the Democratic Party. I believe you're not calling out offensive remarks that are being made at the time by Republicans. A lot of this started early on in that session, and it bubbled and bubbled and bubbled and bubbled. And I'm telling you, I sat there and I watched it with my own two eyes. I think it's one of those positions that you have to really sort of go, how is this eventually going to explode? And I think that that's what we saw a lot in the session towards the end, right? For example, Senate Bill 303, that's the property tax one. Not included in my original numbers, and I think the bills in the Senate went up to 306, if I'm not mistaken. And again, not talking necessarily about the technical ins and outs, but let me tell you some things that I do know. The bill was introduced at 7:30, 10:30 at night, and then it was heard in committee 7:30 the next day. There was no public testimony. I think only one or two people. How is that okay? The public didn't know about it. I get it. We have to also get some of these things done to make sure that people's property taxes are not growing out of control. Understood. Just saying that obviously that's going to upset people, right? Were people properly included? Is this our best solution? Some of you may know, some of our young first-year elected Republican folks came up with similar ideas early in the session and talked to the governor. And then those conversations went nowhere. But then here they are, not included in this draft of the bill. And then it came out of nowhere. I mean, I get why people are angry, right? It's just a crazy scenario. Similarly so, HB 1171, Just Cause. It restructured basically what Just Cause can do for landlords to evict people from their properties. It died on the calendar, meaning that no action was taken and then 120 days expired. But it is something that progressives said, hey, listen, we really want to do this. We knew this. This has been here the whole session. It wasn't even like it was stakeholder, it was there. And it was forgotten about. Who controls the calendar? Democratic Party. And then also Senate Bill 213. Again, we all probably saw this in the news. What I think fascinating here is that we have a very active legislative governor dealt a blow. He didn't get it passed. You know, there was a lot of rumors about, are we coming back to fix this? Are people in the Democratic Party going to be primaried? Are we not all aligned? And I think the answer is we're not, in a weird way. I think that this is the way of Colorado. What's what I love about working here in politics is that don't always assume that we're all the same. And I think we're probably falling into a scenario where we're assuming that we are all the same, but we're not. And that's what really caused a lot of that chaos at the end to really come sliding across home plate. Everyone was just done. There's arguments on the floor, pauses, troopers coming in to get people. I mean, there was chaos everywhere. And as a lobbyist, and I'm sitting there and I'm going, where does the Colorado Bar Association fall in this? Obviously, I'm not in there to make any headlines. Sorry, just old enough to know I should always stay out of the top fold of the newspaper. But on that same note, I want to make sure that what I see as a dwindling amount of legal knowledge in our elected officials. We only have 2 practicing attorneys in the Senate, somewhere around 9 or 10 in the House, obviously one being Representative Junie Joseph from Boulder, love her. But I want to make sure that we're trying to do the best we can to provide legislators with that knowledge that they need in order to make good decisions. But at this point in the session and towards the end, are we past that? We probably are. We probably are. And it's a sad scenario, but then you have to start relying on those relationships to make sure that you're able to get anything done. So what's the future? What's after the 120 days? Now, I mentioned this a couple times before, so let's talk about 30-day clock. It's a wonderful little balance in our checks and balances. Governor then has a certain, because it's actually also operational, if you ask me, as someone who's worked for 2 governors. The amount of bills cannot singularly be signed by one person in what I think is typically during the session, a 10-day window. So he has 30 days. But then it's also a good way for the executive branch to say, here's this bill signing, here's this thing that we're doing, here's our victory lap, we did all these wonderful things, here's this media, here's how I'm going to reshape conversation on 213, here's the vetoes that I'm going to do. Oh yeah, that was, so the vetoes, like I said before, Wool's reintroduction because it was trying to delay it, but Governor Post believed that it should go forward. Changes to the clemency application process, felt that was probably not in the best interest for the process that we have. At least that's what his veto letter basically says. And cost reduction for low-income Coloradans pursuing driver's education. I think this was claimed to be a bureaucratic stall on this one, but I'll have to double check on that one, 1147. It does allow the governor's office to then sort of start talking about the things that they need to talk about and really start to shape what's going to be that line for the next session, because we're all going to be together for one more session before there's elections, right? But sometimes you're scared to do certain things in your first session that you're not scared to do in your second session. Sometimes having an election day changes when there's not an election day. And so I do know there's things that we're going to see again, but if that divisiveness continues, is that commitment to the bills the same, or is there going to be another way to handle it? 213, I bet you is coming back in some form. This bill was, I've never seen a bill go from 100 pages to 30 pages to 50 pages to 100 pages to 30 pages. I read every version of that. I felt like I was back in college reading long documents. Plato's Republic, Book 5, right? And 1171, just cause, like I mentioned before, that's definitely coming back. Representative Javier Mabre, an eviction attorney, newly elected in the state house, was very clear that he's bringing it back. So the question I have is, are we changing our approach, and we being organizations, lobbyists, groups at the Capitol, state, Senate, governor's office, are we changing our way that we're going to do things? If not, are we heading for the same path? What's going to be different? And the truth of the matter is that I don't know what the bar can do different other than without an election day, I've already started figuring out what that agenda is. I will begin to take our piece of the pie and trying to figure out how exactly we do the things that we need to, and engaging our members now so they go, these are the things that we're concerned about. These are things that I want to see. These are the things that I want to do. These are the things that mean the most to us. And so I always tell people, you really, really, really want to be involved. Now's a great time to do it. I have my information in the end, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. So I'm going to pause there because we're going to go into so many bills. Any questions from folks? You don't have to. It's not a big deal. I mean, I just took time off my vacation time to come talk to you. I'm joking for everybody, everyone. Hang out, be there, be cool. So many bills. You know, there really is, in my opinion, less bills. I think I didn't get a chance to check it before. I think this is less bills than our last couple of years, by a few, not a lot, probably the same workload. But the truth of the matter, it felt like it was so much more. And I think it was because there was a timing issue because of all this divisiveness, right? And so let's talk about bills that, not necessarily big ticket bills, because I talked about some of them already, but things that took up a lot of time and not necessarily things that CBA weighed in on, but I feel as a legislative update, I should talk about them. I always say SB or HB. SB is Senate bill, HB is House bill, and then the number. Senate bills are always 3-digit, House bills are always 4-digit. I'll try to read the titles, but if I don't, if you can remember the number that I said, I can always figure it out. Senate Bill 168, the 23, obviously, for those who don't know, it's the year. Senate Bill 168, gun violence victims access to judicial system, repealed. You're able to sue manufacturers, firearm manufacturing and ammunition now. 170, extreme risk protection orders. Expands the list of who can petition. Again, this is not like super expansive. These bills did some other things. They're not that simple. I would love it, but it is not that simple. But I tried to be as quick and concise as possible. Senate Bill 230 is fascinating. I don't know for those who are, or I'm sure you're aware. We 2 years ago created a 23rd Judicial District, cutting it out of the 18th Judicial District, we being the people of Colorado. Really, actually, the General Assembly created it, and then we did send it to a vote on ballot recently, and we voted overwhelmingly to do it. All good to go. The vote this last year was actually a correction to the governor's powers in order to be able to appoint it so he can move smoothly. That said, counties came back and said, well, now we need reimbursement for establishing these new DA's offices. And you would be fascinated about how much this ticked off folks. And I would tell you that this is something that we discussed and we talked about it. CBA has always been involved in this concept, even before I was at the Colorado Bar Association, and I get it. But they were already so worked up by the time here. I mean, there was so much time spent about this. I was so floored. Now, in comparison to other bills, not as much. But I was like, Doug, we've already even worked in the budget. Just say yes, let's move on. You got other stuff you can do. But here we are in this situation where these little tiny things are throwing flares up for everybody. 1249, Representative Gonzalez Gutierrez and Senator Coleman brought this bill forward, started in the House, reduced the age, raised the age for juvenile involvement in the criminal justice system to 13 years old. Governor hinted at a veto scenario here because they suggested that children under the age of 13 would be handled by community programs that weren't necessarily in place. And so while it left the House relatively okay with some good amendments, it didn't do the same when it was in the Senate, and it got heavily amended. When you change a bill in the second chamber, it has to go back to original chamber so they can say, yes, no, please, yes. And they go, yes, I concur. No, I don't. When you don't, you adhere, or you make a conference committee. Sponsor decided to adhere. The bill died on the calendar. I don't know how I personally feel about it, but it was a highly, highly publicly involved bill. A lot of people had a lot of concerns about this on both sides, but here we are. Nothing was done on this bill. I'm just being mindful of time. So couple bills that we worked on. Senate Bill 89, Uniform Family Law Arbitration Act. This bill actually died. We wanted to amend this bill, but I wanted to bring it here to highlight how this situation with relationships go. Uniform Law Commission nationally says, hey, we're going to figure out this piece for all states to pass. Colorado Uniform Law Commission has 2 legislators on it. They say they're going to run it. This conversation happened in January when it typically happens in November because of elections. It gets run. We come with our amendments. We talk to them very early on in the process. We tell them we want to do these things, but we probably weren't clear about what we wanted to amend and how we wanted to amend it. And what became a position where we can work with them became a position that we were almost opposing, right? But thankfully, on the lobby perspective, after we voted to amend on the LPC scenario, I was able to work with the Uniform Law Commission and say, hey, maybe this wasn't something that's ready for now. And we're able to take care of it another time. Similar here with Uniform Community Property Disposition at Death Act. Again, you can read what the bill does. But this was a scenario that we, over winter, worked on it, gave them feedback, provided all the information, testified before the committee, before the session started, during the session started. They drafted the bill. We were okay with it. You know what? We didn't take a position on the bill. Why? We've done a lot of work. We're good. We trust in this part of the process. Confirmed funds for closing and settlement process. Bill modifies the closing settlement procedure for real estate transactions to show the funds intended to be at closing have been received and deposited in a trust account at least 1 day before closing. This, I think I heard in unison real estate attorneys across the state of Colorado cry out. And a lot of them are like, why? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know why. But what we can do is figure out our process moving forward, right? And that why turned out to be, I found out afterwards, from a title company, I think. But I was able to work with the legislator on this one and kill it quietly behind the scenes so he didn't lose any face. And we'll just have to see if this one comes back. I don't think so. Well, maybe if it does, but in a very different format. Senate Bill 77, restrictions on brokerage engagement contracts. Again, after listening to that one, and I'm sitting there going, oh, this is going to be a thing. I talked to our real estate section. They have gone over it 1,000,000 times. They had a couple amendments, and even before we were able to get to LPC, I tried to see if they were open to it. Sponsors were not open to it. But then the real estate section is, we do actually really support and like this bill. And so we took a support position. Great work, everyone together. This bill is fascinating. I wanted to put this in here because I could show you how things go crazy even when you know what's going on. Senate Bill 90, another uniform bill to the uniform bill, the UCC 2022 amendments. This was passed in a couple states. We worked on it, had some amendments, got our amendments in there. And it went through both chambers, it got passed. On its way to the governor, Senator Gardner, Bob Gardner, Republican, practicing attorney, used a little known rule, I think it's 18A in the Senate, to recall the bill. Lesson learned for me after all this time, you can undo the passing of a bill that's passed through 2 chambers and signed by both leadership. Did not know that. Turns out in South Dakota, governor vetoed this same bill because they were listening to a particular group of folks who work with cryptocurrency, that the definition of money had been changed such as to exclude cryptocurrency. The folks here in Colorado did not agree with that. Senator Gardner got pressure from his more conservative members to take a similar path. Governor Polis didn't necessarily weigh in, and he has some cryptocurrency background from his federal days. Colorado Bar Association was pretty much on point with continuing the bill as is. He couldn't politically figure out a way forward and not lose everything else in the bill. And so he worked with ULC for pocket amendments that they had provided other states who were in similar situations, called it back, result to not concur, go beyond the scope meeting. They had other things to change than what was discussed, changed it, and then repassed it. I do believe if you even look up this bill online, it says that it just passed once, and like nothing that happened after that was ever recorded. And I find it very funny. I'll be honest on 103. I don't know this bill, but it is a bill that we supported. And this bill died. But I think it's important because this was one of the first bills since I've been here that our agricultural committee came forward and really in unison said, we believe that this is a bill that should move forward. And so I really wanted to also say, I think one of my jobs is also to make sure that when you are part of a section that might necessarily be that active is like working with you to try to figure out how to be that active. And I think this was a good signal of it. They had an issue that I think is not even represented here on choice of law that was used. And it just didn't have a lot of support and not a lot of understanding. And so it died pretty quickly. We worked with the Colorado Farm Bureau on this one, but it didn't have legs, unfortunately. 1190. This is a 46 minutes. this is affordable housing right of first refusal. Apologize for how short this is. I was trying to go through to list all the things. It's so much, and it has been amended so heavily. Even I, who had filed this from day one, couldn't look at the final amendments, which there was, I think, 15 to 20, and really understand what the final version did or say. And so, like, I didn't want to mislead anybody on it, but the content, the general direction of it remained the same. Bill creates the right of first refusal for local governments to purchase multi-unit residential properties for long-term affordable housing. That changed to, I think, properties that are older than 30 years. The time for local counties to say that they're going to do it, I think it was reduced to about a week, but then they have like 30 days to make the offer and then 60, 90 days to closing. This was a big fight for a lot of folks. I would say that the Colorado Bar Association remained always opposed to it, but people always think that if I'm opposed, I'm not doing other stuff. No, we provided amendments, tried to work on it. We were signaled that a version of it's going to pass, and we go, okay, we're still going to be opposed, but thank you for talking to us and trying to figure out how we can all work together on this piece. I get it. And not everyone in Colorado Bar Association agreed that we should take opposed. And I say, listen, this is the section that came forward with this. They talked to LBC. LBC voted yes. Folks ever say, I don't agree, often we have that debate at our legislative policy committee. But I continue forward with my lobby directive, and with a lot of other advocacy groups, we did try to oppose this bill. And I thought for a little bit, after a long amount of time where we were told it's going to pass either way, and that's how the majority sort of works, we thought that we might actually have the bills to kill it. We didn't. They flipped at the last second, but it was heavily amended. And so this bill did pass. This is now a thing in counties, which I don't think I made clear there, have this right. So if you're doing this type of work, much like my brother-in-law is, often has to make sure that they check with the county before he does any sales. So I'm going to try to do these last three bills and just go to questions and answer, because I think these are pretty important. Over the last couple of years, we've been working on reforming judicial discipline. There was a bill last year, Senate Bill 201, that led to the creation of an interim committee. For anyone who is an attorney in the legal world, know that there has been some concerns about necessarily how things are being managed by the Supreme Court of the entire judicial department. There's been scandals or things in the news. It's not a surprise to anybody. I will say that the judicial department has been really great about working with everybody. Chief Justice Boatwright, who wasn't in charge when a lot of this stuff happened, has really taken on a lion's share and responsibility working with the incoming Chief Justice, Justice Marquez, who is phenomenal and really being honest and open, which is a type of judicial department I really haven't seen in the past. But out of that interim committee, time between sessions, they created three bills: HCR 1001-1001, HB 23-1019, and to a lesser degree, HB 1205, and I'll talk about that. HCR means is concurrent resolution. This is changes to the state constitution. This is going to be on the ballot. Clarifies what the Judicial Discipline Commission's ability right is. It changes the standard of review. It sets up a new system for how that review happens, who's on it, clarifies other pieces of confidentiality. Proceedings are now public when formal proceedings commence. Creates another rulemaking committee, creates a rulemaking committee in addition to another committee that gets created, I think, in the next bill, an adjudicative board that actually does the judicial discipline process. A lot of amazing changes were done here, and we worked on it for years. Colorado Bar Association supported this bill. We worked with the judicial department and the Colorado Women's Bar Association as well, and they were also in a support position on these bills. HB 1019, not necessarily something that's driven to the ballot, but it is something that is required to sort of be with the other bill, given the changes that are happening, sort of smooths out some of the reporting and things that have to happen. The last bill, we didn't really weigh in quickly, but we did eventually take an amend. After the interim committee, it was very clear that there was a lot of positions on how people intersect with this judicial discipline process. There was a lot of folks who didn't understand what was going on and how it was happening and what they need to do and why was their family torn apart, or why were they being picked on, whether it's true or not. Obviously, if you've ever worked with courts, you know that judges, especially judges of color and women, get a significant amount of complaints. This ombuds is there to make sure that they're making a process for those people to be heard, be able to check on the status, and provide reports to Judicial Discipline Commission if necessary. We could not really, the Colorado Women's Bar did an amazing amount of work on this, and I tried to support them as much as humanly possible. We sat in hour-long conversations, negotiated with the Judicial Department, Judicial Discipline Commission, and really tried to come to a peace on it. And while we didn't always get there, we did eventually find a piece that got concurred and passed. And I'm sure we're going to be seeing some of this come back and see how this goes as well. With that, I'm actually going to stop. I will say these are all of the bills that we took a position on. I'll obviously share this with everybody, and you'll see on that bill progress, they should all be passed or dead, and they're not, because they're still trying to figure out, but I'm telling you, all of these have been done. So it's a fascinating process. I hope you guys have some questions or have questions. Oh, I'm sorry, I stuck this towards the end. I apologize. This was my error, but I talked about it earlier. But I want to make sure that I say the session has been crazy. And I think that we are in a position to do more of the same work that we always have. Because I think when there's that need for commonality, it's organizations like ourselves that provide that type of direction for folks. And to that end, I think that the Colorado Bar Association has done it. We did it this session, and we'll continue to do more of it. And I'm hoping that if you have questions or any concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. This is my contact information. Forgive the 202. I do live in Colorado. I'm downtown right now, suffering through what is about to be more rain. But with that, I am done.
Well, Tyler, thank you so much. I mean, this was, even as a non-attorney, it was fascinating to me just to hear everything. So I don't know if anyone else has any questions, but again, your info was up on the screen, and I'll make sure to send that out later this afternoon to everybody. So if they have any questions, I'll send them your way. And yeah, fantastic.
Thanks, everybody.
Do you have any questions for us, Tyler? Or?
I don't have any questions, but if anyone has any questions for me, I'm happy to take them.
Perfect. Yeah, I think everyone's just passing along their thanks. So again, thank you for making a very complicated subject easy to listen to. This was a fun lunchtime. And Tyler did just drop his contact info in the chat. So if anyone wants to follow up with him later or has a question right now that they don't want to ask in front of the rest of the group, take a picture of that info, and otherwise we'll bid you adieu. Thank you again, sir.
I'll make sure to get you a copy of this show presentation.
Perfect. And everyone, I'll send that out once I get it, along with a CLE and a link to the recording. So
great.
Thank you again to Pete Goldstone for sponsoring today, and hope everyone has a good day. Thanks you again, everyone. Tyler. Bye.